now you have your decoration slide. If you wouldn't mind each introducing yourself and your official titles, and then maybe you can talk about what your day in the life as a soil scientist actually entails.
Okay. Well, so my name is Vince Archer. I work at the Region 1 office. So in government, there's always bureaucracy. So you have smaller units, like we call them districts, and they're kind of the basic unit level of a forest. And those are tens to hundreds of thousands of acres of coverage. And then that goes up to a national forest level. And then you have us true bureaucrats who are at the regional level. So Andy and I cover Region 1, and that entails all of Montana, northern Idaho, and bits of the Dakotas in the grasslands over there. So I'm a soil scientist. Andy?
So Andy Efta, like Natalie said, regional hydrologist, so Vince's counterpart here in the northern region, and maybe I'll add a little more onto the structure or the hierarchy, the nested hierarchy of the agency. So, we have above then the regional offices, we then in turn have the Washington office, which is in turn sitting under the umbrella of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which seems a little counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of folks when it comes to land management agencies. That's a long history around personality conflicts and political maneuvering that ultimately resulted in the Forest Service sitting in the Department of Agriculture. So I think that's about it organizationally. Maybe we'll just keep tag teaming this.
Sure.
You asked about academic background and professional background, I suppose, too. So I'm a University of Montana grad, actually a two-time University of Montana grad. My degrees are actually from over in the College of Forestry, just across the street. And both of those in resource conservation. The way that the College of Forestry degrees are set up are they're designed to provide some flexibility, at least especially on the resource conservation front. So my background was basically in just the physical sciences track with my bachelor's degree. Master's degree, again, physical sciences, however, ended up diving more over into the geosciences realm. For a fair portion of the work I did, I actually worked with Andrew Wilcox here in the Department of Geosciences. So ultimately coming out of that master's degree, if you had to try and put, I guess, a silo on my areas of specific technical expertise, it would be sediment transport processes, watershed hydrology, and fluvial geomorphology and modeling of those things. So let's see, professional background-wise past that, I've worked for the Forest Service actually my entire professional working career. I started out directly out of graduate school. I went out and worked in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan for a couple of years on the Hiawatha National Forest. Came back over to Montana and worked for a couple of more national forests here in the northern region again, prior to joining my partner in crime here in the regional office. So I'll let you go.
Sure. So I actually got my undergrad through a couple of mechanisms. So I was in California, so I went junior college because I had no idea what I wanted to do or be. And then from junior college, and actually Natalie taught at the same junior college I attended. It was much cheaper back in those days. It was $150 a semester. California subsidized that. I know, that's shocking. But anyways, so I did 2 years of that, and I got a basic foundation in sciences. I wanted to be an engineer, but I wasn't bright enough. So so from there, I went to Chico State, which is a CSU, so a California State institution. And so there, I took way too many credits in myriad of things. I picked up a couple of minors, one in stats and one in biology. But it was I wanted to work outside, and I was interested in science. So it was a physical science, environmental science kind of capture. So from there, immediately I got a job in road construction, shoveling asphalt. I couldn't get any work anywhere. And you mentioned, Natalie, about internships. And so this is circa the 1990s, but internships were really hard to come by. And so one of the biggest things for me was they wanted you to volunteer. So I was like, well, where am I supposed to live? And so that was actually an impediment for me. So I finally did get a job with the Nature Conservancy, and I was chasing plants all around, and so that was great. And that led to going over to New Mexico, and I worked with a university affiliate there, and I chased plants all over the state there. And that was fantastic. One thing that I didn't understand is like, why were certain plants in one place versus another? So when you look at the landscape, you'll see this kind of trajectory of different life forms as you go up from the grasslands onto the tip tops of the mountains. And so I wanted to better understand what was behind these distributions. So I knew I needed to go to grad school, but I didn't know exactly what that would be. A buddy of mine I worked with had just come from Montana, said the skiing was great, and so I liked that. And then the major professor that I was going to work with was also skier, biker, runner, and so we hit it off great. A fellow by the name of Tom DeLuca, who happened to be your dean not too long ago for at least forestry. So anyways, that's kind of what led me into soils. And so I studied soils here. It was more an ecological degree, but it was resource con. And I really liked this graduate school because with resource con, it was taking that generalist perspective. So I kind of had an interest in too many different things, but it still, it allowed me to chase some of those passions. Coming out of that, a friend of mine turned me on to what at that time was a SCET. And so that was an internship kind of entry-level position for the Forest Service. I had always kind of wanted to work in the Forest Service. I had done a couple of temporary jobs over the summers for the Forest Service back in the early 90s when I was going to undergrad. And so that gave me a flavor. And so that was essentially how I got in around 2000. And the funny thing is when you start a career, you may not think you're going to stay there, but as time goes on, you do. And so just like Andy, it's like you hop from one position or forest to another, different parts of the country, and I ended up at the regional office later in the game.
So as a tag team duo, you hydrologists and soil scientists work together a lot. What kind of projects do you do, and what does your work in those projects involve? What is your day-to-day work like? It's not this, sure.
You want me?
I can start. Sure.
Yeah,
So we'll talk a little. I mean, so like Vince said, we joke really that we're bureaucrats, right? I mean, and it's only partially joking. But maybe I'll speak to kind of the role of a hydrologist or a soil scientist that you'd think of, like, say, working on a national forest, and then we can spool up to what our roles look like. So for a hydrologist or soil scientist that's sitting on a ranger district or a national forest, like Vince was talking about structure-wise for the agency, those folks are employed, or us, we are employed, in large part around ensuring that we have regulatory compliance for the various different projects that are being undertaken on National Forest System lands, be that restoration work, be it active forest or grassland management, range management, minerals. And I guess I should back up real quick. So the Forest Service has a multiple use mandate. And has anybody heard that term before? Just a show of hands, multiple use mandate for forest. Okay, a couple folks maybe vaguely familiar with that. So, the idea is that we're supposed to manage to meet what's termed a multiple use sustained yield across the spectrum of resources that are represented across National Forest System lands. And so that may be clean water, that may be productive soil, that may be providing a continuous supply of wood fiber, or cattle, off of rangelands. And so with all of that, inevitably we have benefits and we have impacts, and so there's a need to understand the scope of those effects as we go about making decisions on the ground. And so ultimately, the purpose of a resource specialist like a soil scientist or a hydrologist is to be able to inform decision makers that we call line officers, which sounds really kind of funny.
Exactly. There's
but
a
like they stand in the line.
on.
But but to basically inform decision makers what the implications are of their decisions. And so what that actually manifests itself as, in turn, then, is a fair amount of time out in the field just trying to understand how landscapes work, like Vince said, and I got into it for the same reason Vince did. I wanted to go spend time out understanding how processes work on the ground. And so you spend some time trying to understand that. You make sure that you are informed on best science. You collect data, and then you turn that into information. And a lot of that's in the form of environmental compliance documents under the National Environmental Policy Act, which is another buzzwordy word that maybe folks have heard, maybe they haven't, but NEPA, exactly, for short, right? So beyond that regulatory compliance piece of what we do, there's also generally providing services to other program areas within the National Forest Service. So engineering needs, for example, hydrology. As a hydrologist, I work closely with engineering. We have questions around like what kind of design flow should I be using for this crossing? Where do we have risks associated with road infrastructure? What kind of concerns do we have in terms of maintaining flows as it relates to water rights that are out there, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that program, kind of service piece of things. And then another piece of it is restoration. And depending on, what the specific national forest is you're working on, restoration may be kind of a minor component of what you're doing, or it may be a major part of the work you're doing. So I think maybe I'll pause there, and maybe you fill in the gaps where what I forgot, or anything to add on top of that.
As a soil scientist, we tend to use a bunch of nerdy terms, and then people kind of go, "Oh, soils, it's like the foundation of the earth," and which without soils we wouldn't have food or the vegetation that we rely on. But I want to kind of step back and one of the things that happened in the early 1900s was set-asides, and that is we had a lot of land grab going on. And so with the settlement occurring, you had a little bit of tragedy of the commons. So we were a little bit over-spirited in our logging and in our grazing. You had the cattle wars versus the sheepers. And so there was no real kind of law of the land as far as like how to moderate any of this stuff. And so initially we had the Forest Service established as a kind of a reserve, not quite national park, but some place where it's like, okay, we want to set aside this, so it's not just private individuals just having the run of the show. And then it kind of morphed where it was like, okay, we had all these kind of degraded lands from the overgrazing at that time because we had, livestock numbers in the millions, and so we had all these barren hillsides. We also coincided with kind of a lot of flooding, where a lot of these new settlement towns were getting washed out. Like Moab actually was one of those, if anybody's familiar with that. So you had all these mountain ranges who were kind of grazed to nothing, and the storms would hit, and then down comes the sediment, and down comes the floods. So the town people were getting pretty pissed off, and that put pressure on. So anyways, that initial part of the Forest Service was really about allocating resources and moderating resources. And so Andy was talking about that Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. That didn't come around until 1960. So we went from this, like, let's keep the soil on the hill actively, kind of like the CCCs in the 1930s, if you guys have ever heard of that. That was really active management to restore the hillsides, vegetate them, keep the dirt on the hill. And then our agency kind of morphed because we had a housing boom coming out of World War II. And so there was this huge, strong push towards providing forest resources, i.e. wood, to serve for all the housing. So that's where there was a big shift, but also we had a lot more people getting involved with the forest recreation. So we still had the grazing, we had a lot more timber, and then we had this huge boon, especially for these communities around here. We had mills, we had 7 mills in Missoula in the 70s, and they were churning along. So soils became more and more a part of that management because there was a realization that, well, if we didn't have soil, we may not have the trees that we're trying to provide. And so that sustainability piece really kicked into gear. And so that's kind of why I'm here. And it's all these policies and these landmark environmental acts that were really around the turn of the 70s, the 60s and 70s, that really established that foundation. And so that's what I do to this day is environmental compliance largely. And it's just to moderate our management actions so that we can perpetuate forests where we're intending to.
In this collecting of data and then trying to turn it into information for compliance reasons and communicating to stakeholders, what do you think your breakdown of time spent in outside? You both got into this realm because you're interested in the outdoors and or skiing, depending on which is also an outdoor activity, versus inside and at a screen typing words or managing other people. Do you do management? What do you think? Sorry, long question.
I have to say, those who manage other people are very gifted. I'm a nerd. I'm just a data nerd, and I'm in the office purely almost now. But when I got into this, I wanted to be out in the outdoors, and I was measuring things. And actually, I tried to be Andy first off, and I ran away. And I was like, I'm going terrestrial. So I was working in Yellowstone, and it was freezing. It was snowing in July. We got 8 inches of snow in July, and I'm supposed to be in the creek measuring these pebble sizes. I'm just like, no way am I going to be a hydrologist. I'm going landlubber. So I think we start out loving the field, and we romance about it all the time. But as we get older, we just get shunted into the office because it moves from being a data nerd thing to really a social enterprise. And so I'll do just one more thing. One of the things that they were concerned with in land management in the 70s when they made some of these landmark laws is that you had to work together with other people. So the timber guy and then the wildlife person and hydrologist, all these different disciplines had to come together to formulate what the projects were. And so if you've ever tried to get 10 friends to choose on one pizza place, it's impossible. Or where to eat or anything. And that's actually what Andy and I do.
Yeah.
And so it's that social enterprise, which is really unique to these agencies, that becomes very interesting. But it also lowers our data nerdish and makes us much more communication focused and organization focused and working together focused.
Kind of looping back in some ways to one of your initial questions, Natalie, was around what we do, and we've been talking kind of a lot more about what's happening at the ranger district and national forest level, just because that's where we've really got the rubber hitting the road, and yet Vince really injected the reality for us at multiple levels of the agency, and the fact being that you get into this one to be a data nerd, and ultimately it's about talking to people, and so our respective positions are really about connecting people with the resources they need to do their job. People being soil scientists and hydrologists, the resources they need to do their jobs on the ground, and that takes a variety of different, the variety of aspects of that, and some of it's coordinating with the Washington office and interpreting what they're telling us we need to be doing. Some of that's being able then in turn to feed back what we're hearing from the field up to another one of those decision makers, at the regional level that we refer to as a regional forester. Again, a total misnomer because we manage a lot more than just forests. And some of it's about best science and making sure that that's available in terms of not only just understanding or interpretation, accessibility of that information, but also some of that being in the form of models, and operationalizing that information in one way or another. It kind of varies. So wanted to get that out there, and then there's in terms of the question around what maybe, and again thinking about national forest and ranger districts kind of scale and what that looks like in terms of amount of time in the outdoors versus in the office. At that level, folks are mostly, it varies again, but when I was working as a zone and a forest hydrologist, I was spending on the order of 2 to 3 days out during field season in the field, and then a couple days in. This time of year, almost exclusively inside. During the field season, even in my current position, I generally get out once or twice a week, but it changes a little bit more to understanding bigger picture issues and questions at play, rather than than doing pebble counts, or longitudinal profiles, and I do a little bit of that, but not nearly as much. So that I feel like there was something else I was going to say to what you threw out, but maybe it'll come to me in a minute.
So one of the things that I'd advocate for is try us on, and don't even think about like, oh, okay, look at a summer job. Usually the qualifications aren't that high for technician, and so to me it's great to just see if you like it. Absolutely. See if you like the outdoors. Maybe you've thought about wildlife biology, maybe you've thought of the physical sciences, but we're always looking for technicians, and now we're hiring more than we have in decades.
Yeah.
And so the only impediment that I'd say is when we advertise for hiring, it's clear in September. And so knowing how to navigate our awkward sites, because, we do lowest bid for everything, so including human resource advertisements. So anyways, I think I'd always like to advocate for those early jobs where you're actually out in the elements, you're working out in the woods full time, and it's not always great, and you're stuck with the same 2, 4, 6 people, but it's definitely something that will stick with you for a long, long time.
One of the videos that is up on the site is with Sienna, and she talks a great deal about navigating USA jobs. But knowing that tech positions are hired in September, you could use some of your time in the summer to prepare your profile on USA jobs, and then you can just click the buttons for applying when the positions roll around in the fall for the coming summer. Does anyone have any questions about what working for the Forest Service might look like? Otherwise, I'm going to ask some other questions. Sam?
Do you guys work with environmental lawyers?
Samantha asked if you work with environmental lawyers.
We respond to them. So yes, we have our own office, OGC, Office of General Counsel.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what they're doing is environmental law. And basically we'll come up with our projects, and usually they'll look at our projects and you'll say, well, you didn't listen to us. We said don't do that, do this. And we'll go, oh, you're right. And we'll try and respond to that. But yes.
There's not there are not environmental lawyers in your office that work with you guys or anything like that?
Yes.
I guess where's the intersection?
Right. So they are in our office and at the regional level. And so there's lawyers at our regional level, and then we also have them at the Washington office level.
Yeah. So maybe tagging on to that,
yeah.
There's this intersection with the Department of Justice, right, where then our internal Office of General Counsel for the Forest Service and USDA then coordinate with them depending on the scope of the issue at play, and that those issues being largely driven by public accountability. So where do we have so talking maybe trying to break this down a little bit more. Say there's a grazing management decision that goes out. and the public objects to that. They say, well, by one or multiple elements of that. They don't like how things are getting formulated. And so then, in turn, the Forest Service may provide a response to that. And then it could get elevated in turn, and we go into litigation with the party. And so then in turn, we're coordinating closely, we being either, Vince and I at our level, or, an individual national forest or grassland, as to how to address those concerns that, like I say, in this case, as it relates to a grazing management decision. This part of the state, inevitably, it tends to be, I shouldn't say inevitably, frequently it comes around forest management concerns. So lots of coordination on that front.
So do you have, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, I used to be a paralegal, so where would that be a useful skill to where I could transfer me into more of the U.S. Forest Service?
I'm going to repeat that out. For paralegal, would there be useful skills? I'm going to say, jump in and say, you definitely have useful skills. But would there be useful skills to transition or pivot into Forest Service from there?
Hell yeah. So, yeah. And one of the things, so I talked about cat herding, different specialties, and try and get, try getting 10 to 13 people to show up at a meeting and then do it repeatedly. And you're organizing and coordinating all these people to do an environmental assessment. So you have a set time, you kick off the project, and a year and a half, well, it can be years, we'd like to say it's less than a year, you have to have it done. And all those skills that you use as a paralegal, for an IDT member, for a writer-editor, those are so crucial. And then if you have any specialty tier, say you want to lean into wildlife, biology or anything, you'll use all those skills. Guaranteed.
So what are just like your favorite projects that you've worked on?
Oh man.
Just to repeat that for everyone. Favorite projects?
That's tough, but a great question. So like Vince said in your gathering as we talk, we're both total geeks. We love what we do, and so as I think about the range of different projects I've worked on, the ones where I've had to go collect information to really understand a situation that's unique, that we don't know how to answer, and then ultimately putting that information together into something to make something workable is what's been the most fulfilling. So a specific example for me that comes to mind is I used to work down on the Bitterroot as the forest hydrologist, and while I was there, we had an issue come up where we had a water right on forest. A group of irrigators had a diversion on forest lands, and that diversion was pulling off a bunch of water, especially late in the season, that was starting to have impacts on the water availability for bull trout, which is a TNE, or threatened and endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. So we have an additional set of protections that we are required to adhere to, associated with maintaining the viability of those species. So the fish biologist said, we got to figure out a way to measure how much water is coming off, and then provide something that's easily transferable to these irrigators to understand how to regulate themselves, essentially, like so that they can go in and say, here's how much water's in the stream, and here's how much we can be pulling off at any given time as we see flows go down through the course of the water year. And so that took a bunch of iterative measurements out in the field, so a lot of discharge measurements, literally just standing in the stream, to understand how much flow we had at different times of year, creating going to throw out a buzzword here, but what's called a stage rating curve to understand how much water was in the channel and what that equated to in terms of overall basically surface area that was being occupied by that water. And then translating that ultimately to habitat availability, and then providing an equitable allocation for those irrigators so that they can meet that need. So, and I think a thread within that is, and what makes the Forest Service really interesting is compared to say, and I don't want to diminish by any means like something like the Park Service. I think what the distinction is here for me is that instead of having a purely conservation based mindset, we have to meet needs. Like people, there is the Forest Service has been charged with harvesting trees to provide sustainable fiber for economies, and like we said, grazing is a big piece of it. And so inevitably trying to figure out how to channel what we know about our resources into how to ensure that we minimize or completely avoid adverse effects to those resources we steward is, to me, what makes it really interesting and more challenging. So
that was a great answer, because I hope that it showed to everybody how truly interdisciplinary these jobs are. I mean, you as a hydrologist aren't doing solely hydrology. In the real world, and the way this course is structured, is none of these items are siloed. You can't study a river and ignore biological and geological aspects. You can't study soils and ignore geological and biological and hydrological aspects. They are all interconnected, and there are feedbacks. So awesome question, thank you, and awesome answer. And Claire?
You mentioned when you got hired for the Forest Service, you went to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. When you apply, are you applying to the Forest Service, or are you applying to a regional office, or are you applying to?
Great question. Yeah. So and that's been changing recently. Yeah. And when I first got into the Forest Service, and I worked seasonally prior to even going in as a in a professional series or in a hydrologist position. So at that time, it was an individual vacancy. So I was out on USA Jobs, and I saw, here's a position out there that I would qualify for, and of course got a hold of the hiring manager and asked a little more about it, and then went ahead and applied. Now we're moving into more of this kind of group hiring approach to things, where we'll advertise a vacancy across a range of different potential duty stations. And so you can go in when you're applying and select those potential duty stations you might be interested in. But so that you're, in that case, have the ability to potentially look at multiple different places you'd be potentially interested in for that vacancy. So,
and just to kind of capitalize on that, it's a one group announcement. So instead of seeing like these range of like announcements for all these different locations, we're just piling it into one. Which is also can be scary, because you really have to monitor it, because it might be only open 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh, this is great. We'll start with Mailer, then we'll do Grady, and I know I saw a hand, so we'll get back to the. Go ahead, Mailer.
So how long are field technicians in the forest? Like how long does that job entail?
I'm going to repeat it out. How long could you be a field technician, or how long would a field technician position last? I think there's a couple of answers.
Yeah, so we can accommodate you going to school. So it can be as little as a few months, so that you can, you're done with school, you come work for us, and then you peel off and you go back to school. There's also another great, and I'm going to stay away from the acronyms or anything, but basically almost a half year. And then we have still other permanent positions, which is almost 3/4 of the year. And so what we're starting to do is we're pushing towards, there used to be a little bit of classism, so there was seasonal versus permanent. So when you're a permanent employee, you're always guaranteed that job, and you get benefits all the way through. And so people would stay in the technician series forever, because they wouldn't be able to apply for those permanent positions. But now they're opening that up in flexibility. I'm not completely clear on, how many seasonal jobs you can have before you can apply for the permanent. But at least it's a stepping stone. So say you want to do permanent or temporary jobs for 3 or 4 years to try out different disciplines, and then you can start applying for those more permanent ones. I think I went around in circles.
No, not really. So a couple of things to add on to what Vince just said. So he mentioned, a seasonal position we're both in permanent positions, so work year round and basically salaried employees, and then we have permanent seasonals, which is what Vince was getting at. Where you have they have a specific number of pay periods that you're on, and then you're just off. But you still are maintained as a permanent employee. You just have time off during the winter. So those are, like Vince was alluding to, heavily coveted positions. The other thing that I wanted to add is that, with this conversion we're starting to take, and again, it's a great time to be working in land management agencies, Forest Service, BLM, being the two big ones, at least in this part of the world, because we're bringing people on. We've got an opportunity, for a new generation of folks to get going and be working out there.
You can be a field tech for very short temporary, summer only, longer half years, on rehires, or you can land a field technician position and hold that for the entirety of your career. And that's, if you don't want to ever do office work, that's a thing you can stay with forever, apparently.
So I know what I was going to say, and it was just that you have, so you have, with these conversion opportunities that we're seeing now, it used to be like you basically had to move around, and that was part of the allure, at least for me. You get to go live in these amazing places, and steward these great resources, but not everybody has that same kind of flexibility. And so I think what's exciting right now is that you can get into these positions, even seasonally, in a given location in your hometown or wherever you want to live, and then potentially work your way through the ranks, which, like I said, did not used to be a possibility.
And I might tag on to that, at least for the fire folks. So if you go to work for our fire division, and it's not a division, but they are making benefits available to temporary workers. So if you're doing wildland fire on an engine crew or anything like that, you can access benefits. So that's a new thing, and hopefully that's coming for our other temporary positions.
Brady?
Do you guys know someone named Nate Anderson?
Yeah, Nate's great.
Yeah, he's my uncle.
Really?
Oh, all right.
All right. Yeah, I was just working with his
Right
wife,
on.
Kay. So we're actually getting some funding so that we can hire some temporaries to go measure vegetation out in this grazing allotment near the Canadian border, where there's a bunch of grizzlies and all sorts of other things, but it's beautiful. It's actually amazing, wetlands and things like that.
Oh, go ahead, Sam.
This might be totally off topic. If it is, you just say it is and then not answer. But is the hydrologist and the soil scientist would be with the Forest Service or not? That are maybe are people in those positions going to Palestine, Ohio, and to study the chemical spills and stuff?
Oh, interesting.
Good question. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to short form repeat that out for him. That was, are there folks working on studying the contaminants in Ohio right now?
So, no would be my initial answer, because I wouldn't be qualified. That's a different level. So for the most part, and it doesn't mean that we don't have people who don't deal with hazardous materials. So for that specific incident, I don't know of anybody. However, a lot of times we're dealing with post-burn environments, especially in California, where we've seen a recent rise. Well, we're burning up houses and facilities and things like that. And so you're walking into these hazardous situations and you're trying to size up what are the risks. So that's putting more pressure on us as hydrologists and soil scientists to become acquainted with okay, what's risky or not, so that we can bring that attention up. Andy, did you have more?
And so just a quick clarification, was your question specifically around Forest Service, soil science, hydrologists, or more generally the disciplines that,
Is the government involvement with
Yeah.
the forest industry, or is the government using the forest industry to study the effects of the Ohio River because of the chemical spills supposedly into the Ohio River?
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right.
You know what I mean? So that's a national concern because it's the Ohio River, or at least a regional. So I didn't know if maybe the government via the Forest Service would be in some way involved.
Yeah. No, I think.
Yeah, and it might be way off what you guys are here for.
Well, so like Vince was saying, some of us work in kind of an emergency response context in coordination with FEMA. Vince is actually a coordinator for our post-fire program for the region.
Right.
And so, yeah, we have teams that go out and, look at resource risks post-fire and do that. There are other, I believe there are other equivalents with other agencies like FEMA, for example, or the EPA that would be looking at those types of issues.
And so hydrologists.
Yep. And I mean,
Yeah.
so we're laying this out very much in a federal land management context, but there are also, state counterparts to us, within like say Montana DEQ, Montana DNRC, the same over in Idaho, and then also private consulting is another place where there are a lot of, folks in the same disciplines, and there's just really quick for hydrologists, there is a professional certification process like an engineer, a PE stamp, and I actually have a professional hydrologist certification. And so you see a lot more of that in the consulting arena, where people are using that to respond to whatever may be requested, be it from private sector or the federal government.
Has anybody heard about our Alberton chlorine spill that we had in, what was that, 1995? Raise your hand if you've heard of it.
One of the trains of the flames, or is that something else?
So same area, same problems with the tracks. So we had our own Ohio happen here outside of Alberton. And we were actually involved in that one because the gas went right on up the hill and killed a bunch of trees. And so we were coordinating in that instance. So it was kind of a jurisdictional thing at that standpoint. But yeah, and that was a smaller scale, but if you've seen any of the Missoula articles lately, kind of highlighting some of those after effects, things like that, pretty bad stuff.
I have a two-part question. How intertwined are you with the BLM? And then my second is, how often do you test soil in Missoula?
Can I repeat that out? How intertwined is Forest Service with the BLM, and how often is soil tested in Missoula?
Andy, do we wear brown?
Sometimes, right?
So yeah, so the BLM gets to wear brown uniforms. We get to wear green ones. I don't have any. But the funny thing is we were just talking about what are our BLM counterparts doing, and so working with them. And so there's this kind of all lands recognition about we're needing to work together because we're facing larger issues. We have these big wildfires that go, and they don't stop at boundaries. We have climate change that we're starting to think of. Andy deals with water. Water doesn't stop at boundaries either. So I'll do the overview. Andy, do you want to bring out kind of some of the coalitions we have with the BLM?
Yeah, it's sort of tough to give you anything but a really synoptic look. But yes, I mean, we do coordinate with the BLM here just in the northern region. I was actually just meeting with my counterpart in the BLM last week. And we explore opportunities around restoration. We try to, in general, talk about where we have commonalities and in as it relates to effects on the ground, and then what kind of resources we're providing to our specialists. From a funding perspective, we have multiple different streams of money that are explicitly saying we want you to be coordinating with the Department of the Interior. So that I guess the amount of coordination is I think we've been coordinating consistently over time, but I think it's increasing.
Testing in Missoula. So we talked about a little bit of the silos with jurisdiction. And so Andy and I work for the Forest Service. So really everything that we work towards is towards Forest Service kind of area management. So there's a jurisdictional boundary. It doesn't mean that we don't coordinate with the counties. It's just we'll make recommendations or share data that the counties can use. So most of the soil testing that the counties are doing are typically, we're not part of that. But we're always interested in sharing those findings towards whatever larger goal.
Do you guys have employees that were in FFA?
Employees that were in
interesting.
FFA.
Future Farmers of America. I don't know offhand, but I would highly, highly encourage, participation in that, because we are USDA.
Yeah.
And so that just looks great on a resume. And if we get some more, if you're looking at wrapping up, I wanted to be doing a unabashed appeal for workers. So
Yeah, do it.
okay. So first of all, one of the things, I like my time and tenure in the Forest Service, but I want to make a plug for physical science in general. And so there's a couple of resources you have here. I think I had mentioned about that grazing allotment that we're going to University of Montana for and saying, hey, we're looking for workers. Because a lot of times it's hard for us to hire. It was easier 20 years ago to hire. We would just say, oh, you're enrolled at University of Montana, we'll sign you up, away we go. Well, that got changed. So we're trying to loosen things up, but we're not quite there yet. But we also love partnering with other organizations. And so I wanted to call out Emma, which is under the Carroll O'Connor Rocky Mountain Center of the West.
That building right there.
No, I think she's housed somewhere else.
She's
Because
over
they're
by the Lomason Center.
Yeah, Lomason Center. So these jobs get advertised at the university. I have no idea where, but they're there. And so there's all these departments in the university that are always looking for seasonal workers and help. And a lot of those may be tied in to work with us. And so that, to me, is the easiest route to get some field experience and tenure and for work in the physical sciences or biological sciences. So I wanted to push that piece. And the other piece that I wanted to call out too, though, is we're doing recent grad hiring. So that is, as soon as you graduate, within, what is it, a year?
Yeah, I think
Within
so.
a year, you can actually apply for permanent positions. That's an incredible opportunity. So just wanted to throw that out there if you're looking. And then always feel free to reach out to us. We do have a person who coordinates hiring, and so I can provide the name and email of her contact to Natalie to share with you. But also, Andy and I are ambassadors, so we're always willing to push the sciences too.
Go ahead, Samantha.
Are tech jobs only outside? Because I don't want to work outside. Okay.
No,
So
we
you're hiring for in office jobs?
we need everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, the office skills, and that's another thing is so we talk about data nerdy and that kind of thing. So one of the things that I notice is we in general are really lacking writing skills and communication skills. So I'm constantly learning because my skills go bad. Think of writing, quick synopsis on email or now it's just the instant messages. That communication and being able to wrap up things concisely is a huge skill that we're always working on bettering.
Yeah.
So I will just say this to you all, where maybe 10% of you are interested in a major in the earth sciences. Some of you might be interested in nature, but not want to work as a naturalist. That might be a position, I don't know. You know what I mean? A scientist working stuff outside. But maybe you like nature, and you like the outdoors, and you also like writing, or you also like doing mathematics, or you're really good at coordinating or scheduling. This is a place where all of those skills are embraced within the subset of your mandate is conserving and distributing the lands for the people, which is not to undersell what is your interest and what is your skill set. An agency like the Forest Service is a really great place to put those things together. Are there any last questions? Oh, Emma.
If you
Other Emma.
are interested in like field work and more of the science aspect, is like writing skills and communication skills, like degree-wise, something you'll look at when hiring as well?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah.
So even that field work, you know, which in a lot of cases may be literally every day out, you know, in the elements, you know, doing, you know, repetitive tasks, or you know, or moving around and maybe not doing repetitive tasks. Regardless, that all has to be communicated, and so yes, being able to write and explain what you're doing is absolutely essential for sure.
Yeah.
Great question.
Any other, we'll just keep going. Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming and sharing your time and your expertise. I have also been pigeonholed in a career bouncing around place to place, and while I can talk about what you all do, it is so much more valuable to get to hear about what you actually do from the people who are doing that work. So it is really appreciated. Can everyone give a